Okay, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and my guest this time is Anders. Hello, Anders.
Hello, Duncan.
Go aften.
Go aften, indeed. It's very good, actually.
Not too bad. Okay, so one thing I don't think I've actually ever seen you address, right, is I don't believe that your alias was Anders. You obviously have some lame-ass fuck alias that you've just abandoned shrewdly to get into this shit. So what is the alias? I need to know.
That's a very good guess. It's true. I used to be called Illusion.
How is it spelled?
Initially,
with a dollar sign?
No, initially it was with a Z at the end instead of an S. And instead of L's, I used like the bracket that's like standing up. Like, it was really terrible. That was a long time ago. So slowly I've upgraded it, and now it's just like straight Illusion. And then I've used like various other things. When I play MOBA games, sometimes I go by like Misanthrope instead, because I feel like that's appropriate for playing MOBA games. Now I did change it specifically for casting. I thought, it's going to be too confusing. I'll just be Anders. That's easier.
Okay, fair enough. When you got into casting, everyone has asked you in every interview, like, how did you get into it? Like, what were the circumstances? So instead, I've got a different take on it, which goes like this. A lot of how you were able to get into casting was that there's a unique scenario that's happened with CSGO that I've never seen in an esports game, where there was no people from the precursor game that actually went hard at it to begin with. So if like Dota 4 came out or something, for sure whoever was really big in Dota 2 are going to be all over that shit. And if they're really established, they're going to get all the initial gigs, they're going to get the big show, they're going to get all the community shit, and they're just going to, because they're going to know what they're doing, they're going to build it up. But there was a unique scenario where CS has always been one of the biggest games, but because CSGO, even CS fans themselves initially were like, they didn't know if they were really going to be into it or if they were even going to follow it. You saw that either a lot of the people from CS had moved on, they'd gone to other games and gotten bigger, or they just weren't into the game now. Like, they were too old school. Maybe they only kept their foot in 1.6 and they didn't know much about CSGO. And so there was a really weird scenario where you could just come in and there basically was no one else. And so you and a few other people actually established yourself really early on. All Danish for some reason, but we'll ignore that. So what I wanted to know was, it's very easy for you to explain the situation there, because it makes it sound like, okay, there was kind of like a safety net to a degree, because it's not like people are going to see you do your first cast and then go, well, he sucks because Joe Miller would just destroy him. It's like, well, Joe isn't doing CS, so all you have is Anders, and then you have to decide, do you like Anders? And he has time to grow, and he doesn't just get like booed off stage immediately, like those like Def Jam comedy things where they just like, people get like a crook around their neck. So anyway, the point I'm getting to here is, that's the world that we live in now. But in an alternate universe, let's imagine that Valve were able to see into the future, okay? And they realize like skins, the esports cases, they realize all that shit from day one. And so CSGO launches, and it's already a game that starts with 100k viewers. And it starts with a big major tournament. And it starts with, maybe not Joe Miller because he's doing League of Legends, but someone like that, okay? So maybe Red Eye and Tosspot, they're all in it from the beginning. Day one, they're doing the big tournaments because they're the guys for the show, that you hire the big names.
Yeah. In
that world, is Anders really just this meek guy who's like, well, I guess if all these great guys are doing it, then I don't know if I should do it, I was only going to do it if there's no one else. Like, come on, man, you would have still tried to become a commentator, right?
I really don't know how to answer that. The thing is that when I started, I partially started because I was listening to some of the casters that were starting before me. So those were Risk and Warclown and Pansy I was listening to. I think Jay Adkins did some stuff as well before I even begun, and he's doing really well now as well. But and then I was listening to them and I realized that some of the stuff that they're talking about, or rather some of the stuff they're not talking about, I think I could talk about, and it would make it like basically a better cast. So if you then transpose that onto someone like Red Eye or Joe Miller or Tosspot or someone like that, would I have had the same feeling watching them? I don't know. I do feel like some of the stuff we do, or some of the stuff that I try and do in a cast is a little bit different from what everyone else does. And I always try and remind myself whenever I watch anyone else cast that I want to keep a hold of that basically. But it's not necessarily that it's like that it would have been. That it would have meant that I would have never, started. I think there's a lot of stuff that went into why exactly I happened to start. And you said I've already sort of, went over that in previous interviews, but I've I've actually kept some of it out as well, sort of intentionally. But there's a lot of stuff that went into why that was the exact moment, and a lot of randomness as well, I think.
What do you mean you've kept it out intentionally? Like you're working on like a biopic deal now or something? You just trying to find out if Will Smith's going to play you?
Exactly. You know, I'm going to write a book like that, and you got to no, but you know, the story that people who've been reading previous interviews about me, if anyone does that, already knows, is the one where I go to different universities. I start reading physics, I go to biology and all that stuff, and I end up sort of not really enjoying any of it, and then I just one evening decide, well, might as well try casting, and it turns out it's a really good thing. But actually, I think my life was like a little bit more screwed up than that, because that's like the simple version of just saying I was jumping from different degrees and hoping that I could figure something out. I actually think I had managed to sort of give myself, in a way, a depression, basically. I really, really did not like my life, and I felt it was going absolutely nowhere. And I had this pattern. I don't know if anyone else recognizes it. I imagine many people will recognize it, but for me, it was like this. Whenever you go to university, there's the semester going on, then after you have the exams, then there's, you know, in Danish universities anyway, there's usually like a 3 or 4 week break where you just have nothing to do. You're waiting for the new semester to start, so there's nothing going on. You can't even like read up on anything. Everything is over. And sometimes it's even like more than a month. It could be like a month and a half where there's just like a long break. Obviously, you buy books for the next courses and stuff like that. And in that time, I'd always spend that time, you know, hoping for the very best to like occur. Like, you know, in some ways really stupidly, just hoping that, you know, something would happen. Like I'd win the lottery, or you know, someone would just hire me to be a singer or an actor or someone, like, you know,
something to be like a break from uni.
Yeah, basically just something to change my life, essentially, just to make my life better, just, you know, anything. And I would always try and do something. Like I'd buy a bicycle, or I would you know, start trying to write a book. I always wanted to do that. So I was like, you know, I'm going to start writing, and then I wrote like 3 pages and left it alone. And it was always like something new every time there was a break from one semester to the next. And I think that's, you know, this casting thing was kind of the same thing for me. It was just a desperation sort of thing to say, I knew something needed to change in my life, but I just had no idea what it was. And I mean, it was very, very random in that sense. It just happened. That was it.
So if you put yourself back into that sort of mind state you were in there, that actually makes it sound like the circumstances were ideal in a sense. Because like I said, a lot of the pressure of a lot of initial casters go through was maybe alleviated. Okay, so you didn't have to be in this place and then try something new, and then people tell you, yeah, you fucking suck, stop doing it, like everyone en masse, you know.
Yeah.
Even though you say like, oh, I'm not sure if I would have done it if like the Joe Millers and the Red Eyes and all these big names had been in, like, okay, on that topic, I always used to say, and I actually thought it myself, that the reason why I did like esports writing was, my initial reason was like, oh, people aren't doing the stuff I want to see, and so I'll try doing it myself. And then I think naively I thought some bullshit like, and then people will see how good it is and they'll copy it, and then I won't have to do it anymore. I can be lazy again, okay? Which obviously never happens, because what I realized over the years was that when you're a really particular person like that, you have very specific ideas about what you like, odds are you're the only person who's going to do it exactly like that. So actually, even though in theory someone could do it like that, realistically, if you really do want that stuff to keep getting done, you're just gonna have to do it yourself, you know. Like, it's like to get it exactly how you want, it's gonna have to be you who do it. So there's a degree to which when I think that way, I always would have done this sort of thing anyway. Somehow I would have got there by some circuitous route, you know. So in that sense, is there a degree to which you like, would you have been confident enough to try? Would you have at least given it a shot? Do you think in such a world, could you have still been like a community guy even if you weren't going to be like the biggest?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the thing is, I always really wanted to work with maybe not esports, but like computer gamers in general. But I always thought it would be from a graphical point of view. I used to play around with like 3D Studio Max and stuff like that. So I thought maybe that was going to be something. But I don't have any talent when it comes to like being artistic. So it was very difficult. So I just gave up on that, and I thought I'm going to do English or something instead. So, but I suppose in a way, yeah, I could see myself still having tried it out, and the response I got initially, because it wasn't like I turned on the stream and then instantly there were like 100 even viewers. It was more like initially there was like 20 people watching, but for some reason that was like enough to get me hooked on it. Like almost like a little bit of an addiction to having, you know, people applaud you and say that was like a really good job you did then, even though initially obviously it wasn't. But still, that just 20 people, and the next time you're up to 60, and next time you're up to 100, and every time it would grow. I think actually at that point, even if once I had reached like 100 viewers, even if then Joe Miller had come back and said, that's it, I'm back on Counter-Strike Go, I think I would have still kept going at that point.
When you think, though, also of the mindset you were in initially, if you unfortunately had been one of the people, and it seems almost potluck as to how casters are initially received, because I've seen people in some other games, right, for example, who were fantastic casters, their knowledge was really good, and I'm watching it and I'm loving it, but for whatever reason, like, the team that they used to work with, people didn't like, or they just, maybe they don't have a good voice for it, or just something about their personality just rubs people the wrong way, they can get the most vitriolic hate against them as though they were doing really, really bad work. And so I can see how for that sort of a caster, if he's starting out, that could be really discouraging, because he might even be doing good as an actual caster, but now he's getting all this hatred. Are you someone where, in terms of your mental state, like, if you'd have gotten a really bad backlash early on, could you have, like, borne through it? Would you have just kept going, like, well, I don't care what other people think? Would it get to you? What do you think? I mean, you've never really actually had, like, at least so far, they've never turned on you entirely, Anders. You've always had some ground swelling,
It's true, they haven't. I mean, there's been some individual people who've been sort of, on hltv.org forums, typing angry stuff, but it's never been like, all out pitchforks. And that'll probably happen. I mean, I keep telling myself that will happen eventually, because I think it does happen to almost everyone. But you're right, it hasn't happened so much. If it had happened in the beginning, like your question was sort of leading towards, then I actually think I would have been able to handle that, because when I created the channel, I created the channel podcast, and I created a Twitter account, and I created a Facebook account. I tried to think ahead, like what would I need basically, and a YouTube account as well. Like I created all these accounts on different like social media sites and stuff, because I wanted to be like one step ahead. And in that preparation, there was also a lot of evenings where I sat down and thought, before I even ever started the broadcast, I just sat down and I thought, I'm going to have to get used to the idea that people might be really, really critical, and especially initially. And I told myself it could be up to like a year before people start to accept that, okay, this guy's like sticking around, he's actually doing some work. And in some ways, I mean, this is going to, I don't want to sound ungrateful, but in some ways I feel like my story would have been like a little bit better, I feel, if there had been like, some old school caster around that I could have then beaten and then, still maintained. But it's almost like that never happened. It's like, I didn't get to take that fight with anyone, except, I guess you could say Joe Miller and Red Eye were casting the Raid Core Cups back then, but it was, twice a week and not, 7 out of 7 days like we were doing it at that point. So
you just needed to kill Red Eye in a one-on-one duel and take his soul, his casting soul, and then you would be the man, right? You'd have the glow.
That would have certainly, I think that would have commanded more respect than watching Joe Miller, ascend into League of Legends and have, 100 million times the fame that anyone in Counter-Strike Global Offensive has had. So yeah, that would have been better, wouldn't it? That would have been a better story, I feel like.
Oh, that would be a very good. In the movie, that's who Will Smith will fight, but he'll obviously be played by like Liam Neeson. I think that would be a good casting. A bit fair to one of them, not to the other, maybe.
Probably not.
When you said that you were just looking for something in your life, so before you even tried the casting, you were trying other things out, like write a book or, well, change subject even at uni, just looking for something that like engage you. And you said something there, like, I'm trying to think what your wording was. Something like you want. It sounds like there was like like you weren't sure of your identity in some sense. Like there was something that you needed to like figure out. Like what am I going to be as a person, or what is my place going to be in the world? I mean, you found it through casting, right? You've got this very solid identity now. People think of you in a certain way. You're associated with the game in a certain way. Like, has that actually fulfilled the need in you in that sense?
Yeah, it has, and I can't even really believe it when I'm saying it, because it's only been a little bit more than a year now, and I never expected that it would be this sort of thing. But I really do wake up every morning feeling like there's a real reason to wake up. Like I'm looking forward to doing more stuff with the game and with the community in general, and that certainly wasn't the case before. I mean, I think I have. The thing is that for me in high school with physics, I had probably told myself, and other people had been telling me for a long time, that physics was like going to be it for me, because that was like, that was all I cared about. I was really interested in it. And then when it turned out that it wasn't, like, it just wasn't. I just wasn't smart enough at university to do physics, and I just wasn't focused enough either. I couldn't keep up with the coursework, basically. So it's like a really it's like a problem you can't really explain away. Like, it would be different if you had like an illness or something and then you ended up dropping out of the course. Then you could be like, well, it's not my fault. But when you have to come to terms with the idea that this thing you actually thought for like the past 4 years that you were going to do, and you've been preparing for in high school, I took A-level physics and A-level maths and A-level chemistry and everything that I could get my hands on. And then you have to come to terms with the idea that it's not for you anymore. And I think if you had asked me beforehand if I would have been okay with that, I would have been like, yeah, I would find something else. And I actually almost ignored it when physics sort of died for me. I ignored the idea that it was like that was going to be like a big blow to me. I just thought, I'll just move on to biology or something else instead. Like, I never really dealt with it in any way. And I think that was like a really stupid thing to do, because it ended up really bringing me down a lot for a long time. I mean, we're talking like, maybe 4 or 5 years afterwards where I was just like wondering, what am I doing? And then, well, this casting thing, I can't even really explain why that has become the thing now, but it feels like it is. I mean, it really feels like it is.
Usually when someone's going through that sort of... I mean, the funny thing is, you're only something like, what, 25 or less than that when this was going on? How old are you?
I finished high school at 20.
Okay.
And then, so then I spent half a year at physics, then... half a year working, then half a year biology, then half a year working. So I must have been around, thereabouts, like, 24 or so when, I spent a year in between as well, just working with database design, which I picked up as like a random thing along the way.
So I know there are people who this is like something that happens to them during university, because obviously university is like you're building towards this one thing, and then if you people find like suddenly like, oh fuck, this isn't the right subject, like I've locked myself into this for like X amount of years. Yeah. But it sounds almost like a fucking midlife crisis thing. Like, this is what's happening in like 15 years, okay? Yeah. So what I want to know is, when people go through those phases, so in the midlife crisis, the famous cliche is the person like buys a little sporty car because he's trying to like recapture his youth or something, and hopes that like a girl will see the fact that he has a spoiler on the car. So just some stupid bullshit like that. But the problem with it is, it usually doesn't work, because usually whatever the problem is something beyond just like something as simple as like just change course or whatever. And so what people tend to do is either just wig out completely or just keep going through the same phase. Like, they switch from this to this, and then they pick up a new thing here and a new hobby next week, and they do salsa dancing now, and then they switch to Morris dancing, and then they're going all over the place, okay, looking for something still. So why, when you were trying all these different things and then you tried the CS casting, why stick on that? Because now it's been, what, like 2.5 years or something? Why stick with the CS casting?
Well, I mean, it's been a year, and like it was a year in March. So like the 17th of January was when I started casting. Okay. So it's been a little bit more than a year now. And well, I mean, I don't know. I think that's the thing, and that's what I was trying to explain earlier. It's like when I had the first time I hit 50 viewers on Twitch, we were doing American matches actually, because we realized that competing for some of the European matches with Risk at ES Planet, that was going to be difficult. So we said, all right, nobody's casting the American matches, so we'll just stay up to 4 a.m. and do the American matches, which was actually a lot of fun. There was some really good, the same players are still around, and the same teams sometimes even. So they're like a lot of really good action in the American scene, and we caught a lot of that really early on in the ESCA League. And I remember when we hit like 50 and 100 viewers doing that, I just could not go back to sleep. I actually felt almost high that like so many people had tuned in, even though when I think about it now, it's completely ridiculous. But I would even, I'd go and lay next to my girlfriend, and she was already sleeping, obviously, because she had to get, up to work the next morning. And I would just lay there for 2 hours looking into the ceiling and thinking like how crazy it was that we've been doing so well. And that feeling, I think that kept me going for a very long time in the beginning. Just the idea that this was like growing day by day by day, and that it was, I mean, and obviously waking up the next morning was all I could think about, was this idea that it's going to happen again tonight. We're going to keep going. Like, people are really enjoying this. That somehow that meant everything.
When you think about when you were describing like your academic aspect there, like, one of the things that people often find hard in academics is if they were really good at something early on, and so that a level of natural talent could carry them through it. And then obviously the further up the ladder you go, eventually talent almost means nothing, because eventually it gets to the point where if you're writing huge theses and stuff like that, that's going to take forever and a day no matter who you are. You're still going to have to do a lot of work and a lot of research.
Yeah.
So eventually you have to like the subject enough that you can really just devote your whole day to doing it. Now, the funny thing is, when I ask this question, this is something I've actually gone through in my own life and come to a conclusion about, but I'll have to ask it as though I don't know anything and it's really just, I'm totally naive. So I have to ask this then. If Anders couldn't apply himself to biology, he couldn't apply himself to physics, he couldn't apply himself to all these different areas because something just didn't hook him, or when he'd start it, he just couldn't, like it was hard or something like that, then how can Anders watch like every fucking CSGO match with anyone who even calls himself vaguely a pro? Like, when I watch CSGO, okay, I don't even like the game that much that I can watch every game. Like, if H2K is playing fucking Wizards, then I could give about 1,000th of a fuck who wins that game. But you can get into it. You'll watch all those games. You'll watch 6 of them in a row. So what is it about CSGO, or how is it that you're able to just get so engaged and just like go essentially as hard into that subject as you would have the person if you'd been that into physics or something, right?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like that's what I should have been like. If I should have really succeeded with physics, I should have had that kind of passion for it. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's probably a lot of different things that go into that. I remember, this is like going to be like a really strange answer, I suppose. I remember once when I played in a 1.6 team with my friends a long time ago. We played like I can't remember what the Danish Cup was called. It was like an online cup. And we were playing against some team on Dust 2. And I remember somebody wrote a post-match report for the league, because that was a thing they had to do. Like all the admins had to write, a report. And the report, it said, Illusion with the AWP did like really brave work on the CT side of Dust 2. And we lost the game, but I had a really good game. And I remember like the joy of that sort of recognition, that someone was like saying that I had done a good job or something like that. And I always feel like, even though there's like a really minimal chance, like you mentioned Wizards, now their Spanish team, they're probably never going to listen to the VOD of me casting in English, because why would they? But I always feel like I feel excited when the players show up to actually play and get engaged in the game. I feel like it's nice for us to be able to throw something cool back at them and be like, right, we can generate some excitement. You can generate some good Counter-Strike on the other end. And even though there's like that bond probably only exists in my mind, it still feels kind of good to me. So I think that's like part of it. And then the other part for me is that I think it's very difficult to know who's going to be the next really big player. And I always just imagine that it could be almost anyone. Like you mentioned H2K as the Norwegian team, who obviously do have some talent. And, there's 1,000 things that could go wrong for them. That could mean they could just stop. Like they could do like so many people do and say, well, I'm just going to go back to real life. I don't want to do this anymore. But they could stick with it. And in 3 years, they could be the next, Forrest or Get Right or someone like that. So I always feel like, well, we might be witnessing the early moments, and we'll remember that in a couple of years if it happens.
I actually think whenever I think about CS casters, because I don't know if anyone knows this, but I've actually been critical of CS casters over the years. Part of the reason, by the way, that I didn't like them in general was that I always thought they were like lazy, or if not lazy, that they just didn't apply themselves in a way that I thought if you were going to try and be like the voice of a game, you should. And so one of the biggest problems that almost every famous CS caster in history, so people can fill in the blanks here, almost every single one of them suffered from this huge problem that they only casted huge tournaments because they only did it when they got paid. And then secondly, the bigger problem was that they wouldn't do like adequate research between the big tournaments. And so the big problem they would have was they were always, and because I've watched all the games, I would be able to tell from how they were speaking, oh, he's just talking based on like what he remembers of a game that he saw last year at this event. Like he hasn't seen that player play since, because the way he's talking, he's like made a mistake thinking that's like a pattern, whereas maybe that was like a one-off or something weird they did there. And not only that, he doesn't know that this new player here is now the new top player. He's still thinking like, because he hasn't seen that guy at the next big tournament, it's just come around now. He doesn't know that guy's just had a really solid 3 months and he's worked his way up and now he's like coming. So he's missing a lot of the really important info that like actually that's what he needs to be communicating to them. Well, I think you're like in a unique position there, because since you started out with the community shit and doing all this stuff like every day, almost doing the casting, even when you then got to the big events, you didn't then just go, right, well, I'm at DreamHack and stuff now, so fuck doing the online cups. You just kept doing it all. And so as a result, you've actually sort of got to skip out on the big problem of when do you do the research, because I get why they don't do the research, right? It's because it's hard to motivate yourself to watch like 10 demos in a day. I can only do it when I want to watch an article or something, or I want to know something. It's hard to do though, you have to force yourself. But you essentially have circumvented that because you just watch the games live. You're essentially watching almost every game. Was any of this like conscious? Like, Like,
Yeah.
was there ever a point you thought, like, right, well, I'm at all these big tournaments now, I'll just do LANs, or are you always going to stick with just stuff every day almost?
Yeah, I think I will. It's the thought never occurred to me, but it was brought up by other people I've been working with every once in a while, that they've said, well, aren't you gonna just like stick to the major tournaments? And some people have even tried to, like, give me friendly advice basically and say, well, Anders, look, if you keep doing these everyday matches, then everyone's perception of you is going to be that you're only doing you're the everyday guy, and that for big tournaments we want the specialists, we want the big star names to come in. And I can see how that works, essentially. But I think you're right. I think the advantage of having watched all the games and having a really close a close eye on every team and every player is a really big one. And I would hate to give that up. So I don't see myself, not doing the everyday casting, because I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it's also smart when it comes to your career, and in a business sense, it's a good idea as well. Because if you keep an active channel like we're doing right now, essentially people start thinking about that channel as being home. So if you want to do more stuff in the future, like recently we managed to do our own sort of thing for the first time. We hosted our own tournament, which was just like, inviting 3 or 4 teams and then having them play out for $1,500. But we did it. We had the admins, we had the servers, we had everything going on, and it worked out really, really well. We had a really good turnout, and that's something you can do if you have a place where people like to show up and watch Counter-Strike. Whereas if you had like the DreamHack channel or something like that, it's more difficult to turn it on at a random point when DreamHack isn't happening and try and do some Counter-Strike related stuff on it. So yeah, I think that there are a lot of advantages to doing it, and I don't see myself giving up on that.
Okay, so whoever told you that advice, that piece of like insider knowledge there, like that's actually something that's very prevalent in esports, which is all these like truisms or like wisdom that is just taken as like gospel now. And so the famous ones used to be, I'll give you a funny one actually. People used to always tell me, don't ever do like really long videos, because like the kids today, they have a really short attention span. It has to be like 5 minutes. And as anyone watching this video know now, like my entire career is doing like fucking 2-hour videos and stuff, like, and that's actually been successful. Like, it's not like I'm getting no hits, so yeah. The funny thing about those sorts of wisdoms is they generally do have a logic to them. Like, as a general trend, something about it applies. But what that person hasn't foreseen is if you're doing something really, really well in a certain way, then it can have its own niche value. Well, what's interesting is that advice that they give you there, when I was hearing you say that, I understand why they would think it makes sense, because that's what they've done with their careers. They think of themselves as like, I don't want to like oversaturate the market. I want to like keep myself as I'm like the special guy who does the big tournaments. And so if I do a tournament, the prestige and all this. But actually what's funny is I think they've totally missed that by doing all these online cups, you essentially created like a ground swelling, almost like a phenomenon where I've never seen anything happen to the extent of like, when those majors got announced and the different casting teams, if you remember, okay, DreamHack didn't have Anders announced initially. Eventually, they added him later. Convenient. And then EMS, for whatever reason, you weren't announced to be doing that. Well, the funny thing is, those events, it's not that it's not like the rest of the lineup was like, oh, and by the way, the rest of the lineup is Risk and Warclown, we're bringing them back, and, some people like that, like you hate. So it's not like people were going, oh, we need Anders because they hated everyone else. They had the big names. They had Lurpus, they had Don, they had Tossport. These are all the people who were very well loved in 1.6. These were the big names. And yet there was this groundswelling of people who were like, we don't give a fuck who is on there, like Anders has to be on there. And that's mainly from listening to all the cops, right? And it's the fact that they were so familiar with you, and you had to be involved in some way. Like, what do you think about this phenomenon? Because obviously that doesn't apply to what those people are telling you in that sense, right?
No, it doesn't. I mean, I definitely agree it doesn't. I don't know. It's kind of difficult because on the one hand, obviously it's a really big sign of support for me for what I'm trying to do. So in that sense, it's really great that people show up and say, well, we want Anders to go to this tournament. On the other hand, it could be a little bit tricky because the tournament organizers, they don't pick people based on, they pick people based on completely different criteria, right? And some of it might not be, immediately evident to the community. And I think when they start to feel pressured as well, it could be, it might not always work out in my favor. They might feel like, well, we're going to make our own decision. And if you guys are trying to force Anders on us, it could be like, that could be a little bit tricky too. So there's like a, I mean, I made sure whenever that happened to just kind of stay out of it, to make sure that I didn't, go on Twitter and write like, really passive aggressive comments about, don't get invited to do all this work, kind of thing. For
I hate it when
reasons.
people do stuff like that. It's just shameless.
It's really shameless, and it's bad for two reasons. It's bad because, first of all, nobody is predestined or has deserved more than anyone else to go to whenever the major tournament rolls around. It just actually doesn't work like that. And if you have that mentality, I think you're probably your career in esports is probably going to be fairly limited. I imagine, because nobody can stand to work with someone who thinks that way. I can hope that all the work I put in means that if there's ever a Counter-Strike Global Offensive International where they bring Dota 2 and Counter-Strike together, which is everyone's dream at this point. If that ever happens, then I can hope that all the work that I'm doing now will secure me a spot for that tournament, because obviously that's something that everybody involved would love to do. But there's no such thing as saying that I deserve it, that I have to do it because I've been doing all this stuff. And if I think that way, I'll also imagine what a sort of mental error it'll be, and what a dangerous path it is to tread, essentially, because it means when you then don't get invited, you don't just become really, then you become irrational. You start going on Twitter and typing angry things, and it makes it even more difficult to be hired in the future. So I always try and remain a little bit cool, partially because I think it's bad, it's bad for your career to not do it, but it's also bad sort of mentally to put yourself in a position where you end up believing that you're sort of destined to do something, because I don't think anyone is, basically.
When you got hired for the DreamHack Invitational thing that we did back in February, where it was a studio affair, and because of the decisions, like you were saying there, the way the producers decide things, they decided that they were going to go with one casting pair and they weren't going to swap anyone else. It was going to be Tosspot and it was going to be Lurpus.
Yeah.
And so as a result, you were involved in the production, but you were with me on the desk and we were experts, okay? Now, that was one of the few times I've seen the public sort of there was a mini backlash on you, because then there were people what the fuck, he's not an expert, he's a caster, and then there was people oh, so you think you're an expert, do you, Anders? You think you know everything about CS, do you? And you were doing a standard Anders thing, no, I'm not an expert. They just call me an expert. That's for others to decide, though. I'm just a guy who loves CS. Come on, man, you're an expert at CS, right? You've watched more CS than almost everyone who's alive, right? CSGO.
Yeah, probably. That's pretty true. That's pretty accurate. I mean, this is the thing. And this is slightly dangerous territory, I suppose. But I think it's actually true that what you label people has a lot of weight as to how other people perceive them, right? I mean, you can do psychological experiments to prove this too, that if you put someone in a uniform and, ask them to give out orders on the street, people are generally going to follow them. It's kind of the same thing when it comes to casting, that if you say that someone's an expert, then they can say the most inane and meaningless things, and people are still going to be that was really good.
Well, I think we've seen this phenomenon with pro players. Every pro player is just automatically the best caster ever,
Yeah, I've heard this from, not just from Counter, I've heard this from the StarCraft community as well. It's that every time someone who's a pro player comes in, they're overwhelmed with how incredible the analysis is. I suppose I can even understand a little bit more in StarCraft. The problem with Counter-Strike a lot of the time is that the space you have for actually analyzing anything is so short, especially in the game, which is why I think the color casters, the actual experts that can really sort of, in a few sentences, in 10 or 15 seconds, can explain to you how the last round was decided, for instance. Those are really, really valuable, because I think a lot of people could do that if they had 10 minutes to do it. But doing it in 15 seconds is a bit of a skill, and that could be really, really tough. But I think I'd say I would say I probably am an expert in Counter-Strike, but there are some things that I won't notice, that only a pro player will notice. And whenever I do cast with someone like Devil, or whenever I cast with someone like Lurpus or someone like that, I sometimes am surprised, and I think, wow, I really did not think of it, and I would have never seen that one thing that you just noticed. So yeah, I think it goes a certain way, but it doesn't go all the way. There's something you can't learn unless you've been a professional player, basically.
One of the weird things about casting in general is, I mean, we've seen in other games where it's become famous to have certain duos together, that people have now started to put the focus, as the production value goes up, on the synergy between the casters. It's no longer you just throw two casters together, or you just see who you can get at the last minute and you just put them together. Now people want to know, like, how does the duo work together? Well, what's funny is a lot of the old school guys who are thought of as the legends, a lot of them, they might think they're awesome at synergy and tell you they are. But I think of a lot of them, and a lot of them, it's like, they just do their style, you know. They're just going to do that style that they're famous for. And if the other person meshes with that and it works, or maybe the other person meets them halfway, then it'll look good and it'll look like, wow, really professional, and wow, they work together so well. But I've seen casts where one of these really like awesome guys goes with someone who it just doesn't, you know, they just totally don't mesh on any level, and it's a train wreck. Like, they can't find what level do we meet on. Well, the funny thing is, most casters, I could understand why they would complain, like, oh, it's not my fault, because it's really hard to have synergy with totally different types of people, because you might have to totally change your style or give up something that you usually do in your casting because that person's going to take that over, or vice versa. You have to pick up the slack in an area where you're not used to doing it. But I noticed you have almost never had complaints ever with your synergy with another co-caster. Like, I think almost every co-caster I can think of that you've worked with, the synergy's been pretty good. Like, you always got like a level of humor, or like you had a good like rhythm. Would you agree? Why are you standing out in this area, do you think?
I don't know. I'm almost about to say something that's going to be like immediately like oxymoronic, just because it's. I think some of this has to do with like how much ego you put into the cast. I've noticed this every once in a while, and also talking to casters from other communities like Dota or StarCraft or something like that, is that a trend when it comes to like professional level casting is that you decide basically on what style of casting you want to do before the game goes live. And something that I've been offered a couple of times by various other casters is to say, do you want to do it so that we cast around each? You know, so you do round 1, I do round 2, then you do round 3, and we keep going back and forth like that, which means the entire round, no interruptions. And the philosophy, I think, as far as I can understand, is that way we get equal time. And that when the first time I heard that, I thought that's never occurred to me. It's never occurred to me that someone might be talking more than I will, and that's somehow unfair. Like, I get less time in other people's headsets or something. And I thought back then, if that is how people think about it, then that means is there like secretly a game that I'm not aware of, that people are like, fighting to look better on the stream or to sound better or something like that? Whereas I feel if we can, like, the stream as a whole is like what's important. So I especially when I have really good co-casters or color casters with me, like Hiko, for instance, from Complexity, or Lupus or Natu or someone like that. If I have someone really good with me, then I'll just ask stupid questions, basically, because I know that they will have really good answers for it. But it sounds better if a question is asked than if they just like go into it themselves. I'm sure they can think of like stuff to say if I just let them talk for a long time. But if I just ask like a really simple question, or maybe like try to pull them in one direction, I know they'll say something really good. And then obviously and this has happened a lot, I've realized as well, is that then I go on a forum afterwards and people say, "My God, Anders is so stupid. Why doesn't he even know anything about the game?" But I'll live with that. Like, I can take that hit from someone as typing on the forums. But then as an overall, I think that the cast is going to look like a little bit better. So I think that might be it. If there is that kind of game going on between other people, then I really don't want to play, because I think it's silly. So, but yeah, I think that might be a reason.
Okay, I have a question to ask you now, and this is going to seem like, whoa, where did that come from? Because it's quite standard that I ask like the tough questions or whatever. I don't really bill them like that. I just think it's something that I want to know. Okay, so people will have never heard this side of what is perceived of Anders. Okay, What if I was to tell you that within the industry, okay, I know of almost no one behind the scenes in the industry who like actively hates you or dislikes you, okay? You're actually quite rare in that sense. There's not anyone who's like, man, fuck that guy, like in private though, but never publicly. But there are people who think or will say, okay, yeah, Anders is like the voice of CS and all that stuff, but he's actually like hamstrung himself at certain times in CS history where he could have done this event, or he could have worked for this company, or he could have done something else extra that maybe would have been better for his career. but he was naive about the industry. Either he didn't know how the game is played politically, or even worse, he either he didn't know you could ask for more money, or even worse, he asked for way too much money. Or you see where I'm getting at here? What do you think on this topic? Because obviously, you're in that sense, your stature, you're at a higher level than a lot of other people at your amount of experience. Of just over a year or so.
Absolutely. I think I am very naive, not just maybe like in the esports scene, but like in general. I really do prefer to think the best of people, and that doesn't always work out, because sometimes people, they screw you over. But that's just a thing. I'm actually just only slowly learning. I'm 28 now, but I'm trying to get better at it, basically. And when it comes to the esports scene, this is what I've come to realize, that it's very, very difficult to know how anything works. So a simple question like you're talking about, how much do you charge for turning up to an event? And you have to try and determine your own value, and obviously you can talk to other people. But if I go and ask Tosspot and say, well, Stuart, how much do you make? Obviously, I can't say what's your salary going to be with this event, because why would he say that? Probably he can't say that as a matter of contract between him and whatever event. And it would also be a little bit tricky. But I can still be give me some advice, And then I have a ballpark figure, and then I can try and say, is that way above what I thought or way below? But eventually, you're still just shooting in the dark, basically. And I don't know if I've been asking for too much or too little, basically. I think I have never really had a problem coming up with meeting anyone sort of halfway. So maybe the fact that I've never had a problem means I've always been going too low. That could be it, but I don't feel like I've ever been underpaid for what I've been doing, basically. The one time where it got really screwed up, I suppose, was for Katowice in Poland, where basically I had said one price for showing up for the 3 or 4 days, however much it was, and we had sort of agreed, me and Paul Redeye, we had sort of agreed on that, and we'd said, all right, cool, that's the price. And then what was really unfortunate is that I ended up not responding to the email where he sort of said, can you confirm that this is what we've agreed on? And the reason I didn't was because my father got diagnosed with prostate cancer. So I just lost 9 days or something that just went out the window. And then I went to DreamHack as well to do that thing, because I didn't want to give up on it. And then I went back home to visit my father in the hospital, and it all became really clumped together. And then eventually Paul was moving back from Cologne to the UK. So he was also running out of time on his end, saying, look, I need an answer from you, Anders, and I'm not getting it. And then by the time I sort of came back to him, I had stupidly forgotten what number we were talking about. So I said, I thought the number we agreed on was a little bit more than that. And then because he has to take that number then and go back to the budget department and say, well, do we have the budget to pay him this much? Time just basically, ran out for it. There was booking the tickets and telling other people yes or no and all that stuff. We just ran out of time, and it was just stupid on my part, and also really bad timing. And I felt like an idiot. I still sometimes cringe when I think about how easily that could have been avoided if I just read my email and written a response. But I mean, yeah, lesson learned, I suppose, that answering people's emails on time is pretty important.
Well, don't worry about it, because in the end, I got that spot and it all worked out great for everyone. So that's the end of that story. So actually, the next thing I wanted to ask about was, when you think of, people will always ask someone like you, okay, what was the best game of CS ever? Or what's the best game you ever cast? So rather than do that question, the one I've always thought's a good one for casters, when I think myself, is... Because something people won't know, okay, is that when you cast the game, part of why it's fun to do it is because it's not like sitting and watching the game and just consuming it and thinking the thoughts in your own mind and having as much time as you want to take them apart. It's not like playing in the game and being totally in the moment and having nothing to do. It's somewhere between the two. It's sort of like the game's coming into you and out of you, but continuously. It's almost like playing a saxophone or something. You have to breathe in and breathe out at the same time. And so it's kind of fun in that sense, because you get to experience the game in a totally different way. And so I remember games that I've casted. I have quite a good memory anyway for games I've watched, but games I've casted, I can remember almost every round, every key, because I remember what the emotion was at that moment and then what it led into, and then in a different way than I would if I was just sat passively watching it, okay? So what I want to ask here is, what's the series or the game that people don't bring up as like a great game, but like it's really underrated. You know, this was like an awesome game. You remember it like yesterday, like the key moments and the game and what was so awesome. What's like a good series that comes to mind there, or a good map?
Oh, that's really difficult actually, because I think, you know, the upside that you were talking about, that we were talking about earlier, about casting every single game of every single day, more or less. I think the downside is that sometimes they do actually blur together a little bit, so it becomes a little bit tricky. But I suppose when you go to finals and stuff like that, you do tend to hold on to some games. I still think the point in time when very games changed Kenny S for Shoxy. I mean, now they've changed him back again, which is obviously interesting. But that was right after the ESCA LAN finals, when very games, I think during that LAN they played 3, maybe even 4 maps against NIP, because there was like a lower bracket, upper bracket thing, and they all ended 16-14 in favor.
Wait there a second.
It's very close to that anyway.
Okay, yeah.
And basically, I think those games were that was the point in time when I kept thinking it's just a matter of time now before very games are going to beat NIP, and then they changed Kenny S afterwards. So I think that those NIP very games during the SLTV's LAN finals. I can't remember what season it is now. I'm so sorry, but I think those.
I think it was 13.
Yeah, it could have been like something like that. Anyway, it should be easy enough to find for anyone who wants to find them, because
It was in April of 2013. Just go back. Okay, so one of the key things now about being a caster to understand that some of the casters still aren't even on this bandwagon yet, is that you have to like accurately build up really good narratives. And the reason why they have to be accurate is because they'll fall apart otherwise. So, for example, I'll give you a good example, okay? One of the narratives that people went way overboard with for the EMS event in Poland was, oh, it's Neo and Taz, they're playing in a major final again. Like, look, they've won another major, because their role in that team is quite different from what it used to be when they used to win. So that narrative works in the short term for that one final, but if you keep harping on that and that's the thing you're trying to build up, it hasn't really got any legs, you know, it hasn't got any steam to keep going, because eventually you're going to realize if you keep watching the games, oh, wait a second, the stars in this team is like Pasha, is Bialy, is these are the star players of this team. So that storyline actually gets in the way eventually. So what are, like, if we talk about some real storylines that existed in CSGO, some good narratives, like a good one that you just mentioned there was obviously the Very Games NIP thing, where that was like the match everyone wanted to see, and that was the match you just knew you were going to see at every tournament, right? But the thing was, the storyline was like, okay, NIP always won every time, then all of a sudden it completely flipped on its head, and then Very Games were winning them all, and now people wonder, like, is it going to go back to how it was before now that they got rid of Shox? Because he was like the guy who turned it around, it seemed. Like, what are your thoughts on that storyline? Like, what did you like about it? How do you see it going? Like, where is it at now?
I think the rest of like the Titan organization now is like they're all very strong players. They've all improved massively. Obviously, Shoxy is one of the best players in the world. Don't think anyone can really argue about that. But I feel like everybody else has improved so massively. Earlier for very games, like at the beginning of 2013, it was Existence, the in-game leader, of course, was playing horribly in terms of actual frags. Like, he would just always be at the bottom of the scoreboard, and people were making jokes. There was like a couple of French players that people were making fun of. One of them was Existence, the other one was Ostriker, who people were just like, whenever he came on the screen, people were like, oh yeah, bottom fragging again. That's a lot of fun. And, you know, Existence has just been playing so much better now. It's he can be relied upon to do, like, you know, 1-on-2 situations and stuff like that, on top of doing all the in-game leading. So the whole team has been lifted really, really far above. And I don't think removing Shoxy or any one other person is gonna really sort of, you know, bring the team to a much lower level. And then I think the gap has just changed a lot for all the teams. So I actually don't think that there's going to be a point in time where any one team again is going to do what NIP did with their 87-0, you know, LAN record and stuff like that. I think that time is luckily, or fortunately, that's past now.
Even though in the NIP Very Games thing, people used to complain. Like, people used to say, oh, NIP's killing CSGO, they're winning too much.
Yeah.
But actually, what's funny is even if Very Games never won, just the fact that they'd never won even made the storyline cool. It meant you wanted to see next time. Like when they had those games at ESAA you're mentioning where it's 2 times 16-14, that was like, you couldn't even believe that's happening. Like, how could this even be? Like, obviously it was like so close, and like surely they're going to do it next time. Like, that made you even want to watch next time, even though they've lost like 5 or 6 in a row at that point, you know.
Yeah.
When you think of the rivalry later, when Very Games was winning it, Titan rather, it was a lot more competitive at least there. Like actually you didn't know who would win each time. But the problem is with that rivalry is we haven't seen it beyond the DreamHack Invitational. Okay, they didn't play at either of the big two tournaments after that. And now that Shox has gone and he was the guy who turned it all around, I kind of worry, like, has like the coolest part of that story passed us by? Is it going to go back to like, is that the storyline still? Or has something else superseded it? What do you think?
Well, there's another story in all of this because the reason why they removed Kenny to begin with, for the after the LAN finals, is that they sort of decided that Kenny on LAN is just not as good as he was online. He's a very young player, and probably the LAN, the nerves, like the whole atmosphere is really getting to him, right? So we need someone who's really stable like that. And I think because Kenny is such a young player, there's a really good chance that if he gets the actual LAN experience, if he keeps playing, if he can do as well, if he can just become a little bit more consistent. I'm not talking about I'm talking like small increments. Then all of a sudden, Titan could be the best team in the world because of him. I mean, because of how incredibly strong he could be with the AWP. But it's down to like a little bit. I can definitely see that being like an emerging storyline. And then there's just the rest of the team, coming to terms with everything, because there's another thing here that's also worth thinking about, which is that when Kenny was in the team last time, when they were Very Games and all that stuff, and they kept losing to NIP, Very Games had a style where they had existence just commanding every single thing that happened on the map, right? Everyone would hold one position and they would not move until, told otherwise. They do only, as you said, like it was basically existence trying to play, StarCraft, where he was like micromanaging every single player. And that's very, very tough. I actually have no idea how he could even do that, but that's basically the style that they were playing. Whereas when Shoxy joined, and because of Shoxy's personality, presumably, that changed a lot. I don't think Shoxy wanted, to be in a team where that was like, that was going to be the thing. I think it was more reasonable for them to say, all right, existence, let's go a little bit of the reins, and then everyone else can play a little bit more individually. And I think that style suits Kenny a lot more. He can be more effective when he has a little bit of room to make up his own mind sometimes and go for some crazy peaks. So I think the team as a whole is has just been going through like one long like evolutionary storyline, and I think it's really fun. I don't think it's come to an end at all. I think we're just going to keep seeing how it'll sort of move on, basically.
The NIP that was winning everything, even after they lost those first few times, there was a period for like a year and a half where they'd won something like, I think it was something ridiculous like 12 out of 14 tournaments or something ridiculous, like only twice they hadn't won, and then only once they hadn't got to the final, or some insane stat like that. And so that team, it seemed like it's just destiny. Like even if you stop them once, then they're going to win the next tournament. And even if you stop them twice somehow, well, they'll win the next 3 tournaments. Like they're always going to, they had like something about them where they were unstoppable in that sense. They're always going to win. Well, ever since the Very Games period where Very Games started beating them in a row, actually NIP's only won like 1 international tournament since then. In another quite a long period of time. Now we're looking at like 6, maybe like 8 or so months. They've only won 1 tournament, but they always get to the final. They always get... So, obviously, it's not a talent problem whatsoever. It's not, in theory, performance. Because, listen, you put them in a semi-final, I'd bet my fucking house that they're going to win no matter who they're playing, because they always win the semi-final. But something's happening where they're losing to different teams each time. They lose to the Poles, they lose to Very Games, they lost to Fnatic. They're not, like, unbeatable now. And, in fact, it almost looks like there's some kind of performance thing there. Like, some of them are choking or... They've lost that aura. What do you think there's some kind of performance issue going on with NIP? I mean, if you can get there every time, it can't ever be that you're just having a bad tournament, is it?
No, definitely not. I mean, I think that the team as a whole has been going through some, they've been swapping out in-game leaders, which is a pretty clear sign that they also thought there was something that wasn't quite working right. So they even worked with having Get Right doing the in-game leading at some point, and they had Fiflaren doing it because that's what he used to do in his Source team back in the day. And now they've gone back to Exist. And I think what many people have sort of pointed out now is that it feels more like NIP now are playing like the NIP of like early 2013. So I feel like almost like they could have actually come full circle now and be very, very strong at this particular point in time. But it won't seem as impressive because everybody else has stepped up their level too. So now a lot of the tournaments are decided by... the brackets, which I think from an audience point of view is like the best thing that can ever happen. Virtus Pro winning at Katowice did have something to do with how the brackets worked out. Fnatic at DreamHack Winter maybe a little bit more, but that's just how the game is, isn't it? That's how it is for a lot of different sports. If you read the wrong opponent at the wrong time in the bracket, you could end up losing the whole tournament. Devilwalk had this great phrase. I don't think he realized it, but to me it sounded like it could have been like a line that you could have dropped like at the beginning of an esports promotional movie or something like that, like free to play kind of thing. He said like there's a really thin line between having a great tournament and having a completely failed tournament, and I think that's pretty accurate. And when you're at that stage in the competition, then you know that you have a pretty good pro scene going on, because it is just more fun when you don't quite know. When it comes to NIP, I think it's just a matter of time before they actually do end up taking number one. I think that's going to happen at one point. They will. I can't see them not winning a major tournament, basically.
When you think about, as an outsider, since we don't have to see who's arguing with who or who likes who behind the scenes of players always, it's sometimes there are moves that seem very obvious. So, for example, even though they won all the stuff now, so it's easy to say now, it was obvious to everyone that at some point in time, Very Games has to recruit this Shox guy, because he's playing on this imaginary team that's fucking terrible, and yet he's like a monster, and they need something to beat Nip. So the obvious solution is like eventually they're going to have to make that move. There's certain moves that almost overwhelm you. Same way as if Shox is leaving, even if they had problems with Kenny S before, who are you going to recruit? It has to be Kenny S, because he's going crazy again on his own and other teams. So these moves seem to make sense, obviously. If you had to, without knowing any of the stuff behind the scenes, make one roster move now in CSGO to make the game even more awesome. So you can either take a player out of a team or put a player onto a team. You can only do one though. And it can't just be put Shox back on the Titans. It has to be like a different one than that. I just want one roster move. This is going to really make the game like, we're going to either create a new awesome team or we're going to kick it to a new level. What one move do you want, Anders?
That is really, really difficult. Something in me wants to say swapping a player on Na'Vi, basically. I still think Na'Vi is like on the edge right now of being like a really incredible team. Obviously, winning the Star Series lands last time was kind of a statement, but I think they can go even further than that. So then it would have to be like Zeus or Starix, basically, and they've been a pair for a really long time. So that's also going to make it really difficult. I would like Markelov to go back on Na'Vi, basically. If I had to do like a crazy move like that, yeah, I'd put Markelov back on Na'Vi somehow.
And what would be the implications of that? What would be the outcome, do you think?
I would hope that it would. I think, because you said ignore like the personality aspect, and I'm assuming Markelov leaving Na'Vi in the first place means there's going to be some bad blood between them in some ways. But if there isn't, if you just ignore all of that, then I could imagine that Markelov being back with Edward on the team, actually maybe both Edward and Markelov could play even better than they are right now, and then having Guardian do the AWPing as well. I think there could be some really good potential in that lineup. So yeah, that would be my thing. When
I described before, like I said, the Shox leaving Titan was really the moment where like, that awesome matchup of like every tournament I want to see Fire Games and I want to see Nip. I want to see that every single time, hopefully in the final. That actually to some degree has tailed off a bit now that Shox is left. It's still an interesting matchup, but it's not the same as when it was 50-50 every time they played and you really didn't know who would win. So what is the match for you now? Like this is the next tournament. I want to see these two teams meet like in a final or in a semi-final. I want it to be the best game. Like what are the two teams right now that you'd match up? Like this is going to be an awesome game.
There are a lot. I've been talking to various people about this, because what happens every time a new team wins a major tournament, especially if it's a team that hasn't won before, or even if they just knock out another team that is like predicted to win the tournament, is that there's like an initial really bad reaction from the community where everyone is like really upset. Let's say next time, just to take like a completely random team, FM Toxic or Alternate or something. Let's say they show up really well prepared for a tournament, and they knock out Virtus Pro, and then they make it to the semifinals and they finish in second place or something like that, or like to the finals and then they don't win it but they finish in second place. Then afterwards, there's like a positive reaction, because now every game that Toxic or Alternate plays in, people now have a whole new respect for them. Like for the actual tournament, while the tournament's going on, people are really upset, and it's annoying that Virtus.pro, some other team that they were looking forward to seeing, gets knocked out. But now that we're past the tournament, we have like a new team that we can add to the list of really cool teams that people love seeing, playing with each other. And I think right now we do have like LGB, Fnatic, Virtus.pro, Dignitas, and NIP, and Navi as well. Hellraisers probably you can add to that list, and for maybe not for everyone, but I think for some people, some of the American teams as well, like iBuyPower and Complexity. And the more teams we can add to that list, I think that the better it's going to be. But in between that list, there are like some matchups that are better than others. Obviously, I think I think Dignitas is basically catching up to NIP slowly, and I think that matchup is going to be more and more interesting. But at this point, it's anybody's game. They all have storylines, don't they? Like, that's the thing. They've all played and been knocked out by each other at some point or another. So that's a very difficult question to answer. I think maybe I generally like seeing Dignitas play. It's annoying that they keep having like roster changes. But maybe Dignitas and NIP, or maybe Dignitas and Titan or something like that.
Okay, so we're in this time period, which is very unusual for CSGO, where all these tournaments in a row are being won by a different team over the span of like 6 or 8 months. Yeah. Just different teams over and over and over, and not even like the absolute best teams. So in theory, even the team who's like the 8th best team now can maybe have a miraculous ESWC type run and they win the whole tournament. So as a result, this gives you really fertile ground to make some genius prediction here, Anders, which is I want to know, just as it stands today, if you had to guess over the next 12 months of play, which one team wins the most tournaments out of all the top teams? Which is the one team that you're going to put your money on?
The one team, that is difficult. I have to try and factor in like whether or not I even believe they're going to like stay together as a team or something like that.
Oh my God, NIP confirmed disbanding after this next tournament. How could you?
How could you?
Finally, Fifth Lawrence kicked out Forest.
Exactly.
All those years of bottom bracket.
Well, look, I think saying NIP would like be a pretty obvious choice, but you said winning and not just like doing best overall. So like
win tournaments we're talking about here.
Yeah, not just like on average, seeding higher. So yeah, winning the tournaments. It's a lot on the line here because I could really look like a genius, couldn't I? Like 12 months from now, I could just be like, wow, Sky Anders is like too good. I don't know. I'm gonna exclude NIP just because I feel like it's too obvious. Placing number 1. Damn, that's a really tough question. I've never even thought about that before. I'm gonna say Fnatic because of how young they are. Actually, I think they have a lot to learn still, but I think the fact that they have potentially like a lot more to gain. So yeah, it's very difficult to say. I don't have like a really good reason why I'd say that, but yeah, they're a little bit younger, and I think with a little bit more practice and a little bit more sort of experience, I think they could grow into a pretty cool team, an even better team.
Okay. Yeah. I got another one along these lines.
Oh no.
12 months from now, who is the new top player that wasn't a top player before this year? Who is the guy who's now emerged as like, he's up there with the Dosia, Get Right, Shocks, Kenny S, all those guys. Who's the new guy who joins them? Because there's always going to be 1 or 2 every year, Is there someone who you get a sense that this is where he's headed to?
I think there are a few that could do really, really well. But it's very difficult to say whether or not they really are going to keep playing at that level. Like if they'll take it seriously enough for a long enough time to reach that level. Because obviously, if you want to be like Get Right or Shocks, it's the sacrifice is like kind of immense, right? You do need to put a lot of time into it. So I think recently I haven't actually seen him play like that, but I think Apex in the past has shown some from LDLC. I think he's shown some really good stuff, some really good signs that he could be a really good player. I think Legia from Mouse Sports is another candidate for someone who could step up his game quite a lot and become quite good at the game. And when you say like superstar, you have to pick someone who's not already already at that really really high level. So yeah, I mean, I guess if you're talking about mouse sports, someone like Chris J as well seems like he's got a talent for doing really really incredible stuff. There are some of the Norwegians. Well, actually, okay. So just to make a completely crazy prediction here, Ensa, who plays for who used to play for, what was the team? Party Astronauts, I think, the Norwegian team. Just like a random mix, but he's actually War Clown's brother.
Okay, we can forgive him that.
We can forgive him that. He doesn't have to be tied to that. But he actually very much impressed me. So yeah, I think he could be another one. But I haven't seen him play for a long time, so it's one of those things where if he gives up and goes back to school or whatever, then maybe not.
Are you someone who's watched a lot of movies? Do you know a lot of actors, a lot of movies? I get the sense you do.
Yeah, I think I actually I've stopped watching television and movies for a long time now, but I try and keep up every once in a while. So if they're older movies, there's a bigger chance.
Okay, no, this will work. Right, so here's the premise for my final topic. I'm gonna ask you about someone who you've cast CS with, and what we're gonna imagine. And this is obviously actually reality, even though idiots on the internet don't think it is. People on the internet don't really know what these people are like. They've only heard them talk about CS or read their tweets or something like that, So it's very different to how you'd actually meet them if you talk to them privately or you talk to them in one-on-one on Skype or something. So to give some insight into what these people are like who you've cast with, I'm going to say the name, and either you're going to tell me say a character from a movie who just that's who they are, or if you can't do that, tell me an actor who would play them, who could pull it off. It's one of the two. So there's the premise, and I'll throw a simple one out to begin with. A very easy one. Lurpis. What would my man Lurpis be like? What character or what actor? Which do you think?
To
explain to the crowd, what is this guy like?
Oh, that's difficult. Actually, you said an easy one, and the thing is, I'm really terrifically bad at this game, but I'll play along. So have you ever read The Catcher in the Rye?
Yeah.
So the main character,
Holden Caulfield.
Yeah, Holden. I don't want to say you can't mesh those two characters 100%, but was there a Catcher in the Rye movie? There must have been at some point. Someone
Possibly.
must have made a really bad movie. So I'm gonna say him as a character, someone who it feels like to me with Lopez, he could be doing a lot better, but he just kind of chooses not to when it comes to getting along with people. So I always think that's very funny. But yeah, that's gonna be my answer.
Okay, so the next one is Semler. Who the fuck is Semler? The question everyone wants to know.
Semler as a character in a movie. You have to be someone from American Pie, doesn't it? I don't know. That's really, really difficult. I don't know. Why can't I remember who else was in I don't know. I just said American Pie because that's what came to mind basically.
What kind of a person were we looking for?
It's just someone who has a lot of energy basically, and kind of wants to move forward basically. Looking for the next step up. So I just can't remember what they're all called now because it's been 10 years since I watched any of the American Pie movies. Has it been 10 years? It must have been.
Yeah, more than that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know if I can come up with a really good answer for that. That's
just someone from the American Pie movies. Okay,
that's so what came to mind anyway.
People can find that one themselves then. That's an Easter egg.
Probably will.
Right. Have you actually done duo casting with Dunn?
Yeah.
Okay, who do you pick for him?
I casted with Dunn on a couple of occasions actually. It's Corey Dunn. It's a very sort of lean back kind of guy. He'd have to be a football coach kind of guy, from some of the football movies. I want to say Any Given Sunday, but I can't remember who was playing in that.
Al Pacino?
Yeah, maybe something like that. Like he just, but kind of, I don't know, kind of inspirational and also kind of like relaxed in a way. I always, whenever I talk to Dunn, I do try and talk to him every once in a while, whenever when both on Skype or something like that. So he always feels like he's very, I feel pretty comfortable talking to him about, getting advice. Like we were talking about earlier, like being naive in the esports industry. So, sometimes you do need someone you can go to and say, what do you think about this situation? And I think of Corey like that, basically.
What about Tosspot?
Tosspot. For some reason, it still brings to mind. Maybe it's because he looks very young. At least in my mind, he looks very youthful. I wanted to say like another one of those American teen movies, but I can't exactly bring a character or an actor to mind. Maybe what's his name?
What movie?
The guy who plays Stifler in American Pie. Like he's a little bit too maybe too aggressive. I don't know.
Sean something or other, isn't it? Yeah,
something like that. I can't explain. I have no good reasoning either. I'm really terrible at this game, and I'm trying to keep the image out of my mind. That I think you said to me during the DreamHack Invitational
that Steele was a pie fucker.
No, well that wasn't even it.
Oh, okay, I thought that was the reference because that was American Pie.
Well, that's true actually. Steele should have been a character. I would have said that immediately, but no.
No, he looks a bit like Tosspot.
Huh? Yeah, doesn't he? There's something.
But unfortunately, he's a real person. He's not actually a character from that movie.
Damn. Well, no, but the thing you said, was it? I think you said that Tosspot's job was like showing up to events and telling us the new Twitch servers were coming in different parts of Europe. So,
yeah.
I mean, there could be something there as well. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm terrible at this game.
Okay, let's close on this one then. Thorin.
Thorin. Oh. That's like a guy in a movie or something like that. Okay, I can do this one. I think I'm gonna go with Gus from the TV show The Wire, the guy who works as like an editor on a TV or on a newspaper basically.
Sure.
And has to try and motivate people to do proper writing, and people around him generally don't. There could be like a couple of people. I mean. There could be a lot of references, I think, to The Wire. I should have thought about that earlier, basically.
Yeah, obviously Semler's like Omar. He's not in any way, by the way. If you're listening to somebody, you're not Omar, okay? If there's one thing you need to learn, you're not Omar. That's all we need to say.
Not Omar. All right.
He wishes he was, though. Everyone does.
Yeah, maybe McNulty. I mean, like fairly good looking, drinks a little bit too much alcohol, maybe. Something like that.
Could that be the bunk man? Yeah.
The bunk. Yeah.
Okay, we've descended completely away from Counter-Strike here. Okay, do you have a final message for people who watched the interview? Something you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I did this in the last interview as well. I think we're like reaching a point where everyone in esports is like starting to take Counter-Strike really seriously as an esports title, if they didn't already. And I think we have a lot of inherent advantages, basically because a lot of the people who make decisions about what games get picked up for tournaments and stuff, a lot of these people actually have histories, like childhoods playing Counter-Strike. So I think it's really close to a lot of people's hearts, even people who are involved with something else now. I think a lot of people still look back at Counter-Strike and think, well, this is like a golden era of my life. So there's that going on, and we can do a lot, and we are trying to do a lot. I have been working really hard recently to try and build up stuff that's just more than casting, like this tournament theme, but I want to try and do more than that, essentially. But I think the thing that people don't realize when they're watching streams and following people on Twitter and doing this is that the community, the crowd, as it were, they have like an immense power in deciding how well things go. So I want people to try and pick a couple of professional streamers, as many as you can, but at least like just pick a few and go and watch their streams. Like, follow them on Twitter. Do something like that proactive to try and help them keep on doing it. Because right now we're seeing a lot of people streaming. Recently, with like huge success, Pasha was streaming, and he's like an incredible guy and really funny. So he got like 11,000 people watching. If you go and follow these people, Hiko's streaming a lot. There's been like a lot of people that do so. And recently I talked Guardian into streaming, and I know he wants to try and do it more. So if they get a really good feedback, if you guys tune in and follow them and and really sort of support them, then that will help the community and the scene grow a lot more. And I think the future for Counter-Strike is, I don't know, a lot bigger than people maybe imagine. So yeah, with your help, then that's the thing. Go and support some of those people.